All right, diving into a tough one today, but a necessary one. We're tackling the mind of Adolf Hitler, and specifically, we're going right to the source. His own words in Mein Kampf.
Yeah, not exactly a lighthearted beach read, but you're spot on to really get the how and the why behind, well, the horrors of the 20th century. You got to grapple with the ideology that fueled it all.
And we're doing that by cracking open this, what is it, like a combination autobiography manifesto thing he wrote back in the 1920s. Wild to think he wasn't even in power yet when he put all this down.
Absolutely. Mein Kampf gives us this look inside his head, his worldview, way before the world really knew how dangerous he was.
Okay, so where do we even start with something like this?
Well, a lot of historians point to Hitler's younger years, especially his time in Vienna, as a crucial starting point. You see his experiences there, and he describes them in Mein Kampf, really shaped his entire outlook.
Right, he goes on about becoming this diehard nationalist during those Vienna years. What was it about that time and place that sent him down that path?
Picture Austria in the early 1900s. You've got this once mighty Habsburg Empire falling apart, nationalism is on the rise, fueled by economic struggles, and anti-Semitism, it's rampant, especially in Vienna. Talk about a breeding ground for extreme ideologies.
And it's in this climate we encounter a figure who really fascinated Hitler. Karl Lueger, Vienna's mayor back then.
Right, and this is where context is everything. Lueger, he was a pro at using anti-Semitism to get what he wanted, but he was also, a pragmatist. He worked the system, achieved his goals by playing the game. Hitler admired how effective Lueger was, but took that same hate, those same prejudices, and just dialed them up to 11. He wasn't interested in working within the system. He wanted to burn it all down.
This admiration for Lueger's effectiveness, almost like a disgust at his methods, it reveals something key about Hitler. His absolute ruthlessness, his willingness to use anything and anyone to get his way. And speaking of getting his way, throughout Mein Kampf, he lays out these, core beliefs. Extreme nationalism, this obsession with racial purity, and this ingrained anti-Semitism as the supposed solution to it all.
And these weren't just ideas to Hitler. They were like undeniable truths, the keys to putting Germany back on top, to him. He twisted Germany's World War I defeat, the economic turmoil, into proof that the Jews, the Marxists, the Weimar Republic, they were all to blame. And his arguments, though totally irrational, based on nothing but prejudice and made-up history, they resonated with people desperate for answers, desperate to blame someone.
It's chilling how he tried to justify his hate with these twisted scientific theories and straight-up fabricated history.
And it gets worse, believe it or not. Hitler, he genuinely thought he was chosen, an instrument of some higher power put on this earth to fight the Jews and make Germany great again. This messiah complex, this savior complex, made him even more dangerous.
Which brings us to one of the most unnerving parts of Mein Kampf, how he analyzes propaganda and manipulating the masses. He spends a good chunk of time dissecting World War I propaganda.
He was critical, yeah, but also kind of in awe. He saw how effective the Allies were at turning people against Germany with their propaganda, while he felt his own country fell short.
So he learned from the best, or worst, I guess. He practically writes the playbook for manipulating people in Mein Kampf. Emotion over logic, the power of repeating the same message over and over.
And this wasn't just theoretical for him. His insights, they became the foundation of Nazi propaganda, which, as history shows, was terrifyingly good at spreading his hateful ideology.
He even remembers the exact moment he decided, politics, that's my game now. Some seemingly random meeting of this tiny group, the German Workers' Party. Think about that. This one event, which could have been totally forgotten, set off a chain reaction that led to World War.
Sobering reminder that even the smallest events can spiral out of control.
Speaking of spiraling, let's get into how he used those propaganda skills to build the Nazi movement from the ground up. So he's got this, weaponized propaganda toolkit now, and he goes and lays out this whole plan for building the Nazi movement. It's chilling, like reading some evil how-to guide.
Yeah, and a scarily effective one. Hitler knew swaying people with propaganda was only part of it. He needed, dedicated followers, the boots on the ground for his, so-called revolution. So in Mein Kampf, he gets into the early days of the Nazi Party, how he structured it, the strategies he used, even deploying the SA, his street thugs, basically, to intimidate anyone who opposed him.
He talks about winning over people who were already disillusioned, tapping into their economic anxieties, and, using fear and intimidation to silence any opposition.
Yeah.
It's calculated, this mix of propaganda, organization, and just brute force.
What's striking is how he positions himself against the intellectuals, almost like they were the enemy. He knew there was this resentment simmering in post-war Germany, people blaming the intellectuals, the politicians, for the defeat, the economic mess. So he uses that anger, makes himself out to be the man of action, the decisive leader who can restore Germany's glory.
Weaponizing their frustration, that need for a strong man who will promise to make things great again.
Exactly. And this whole action overthinking thing, it wasn't just him being him, it was strategic. By being the opposite of those out-of-touch intellectuals, he could appeal to a population that wanted change, maybe even at any cost. It's sad, really, how often this happens in history, demagogues exploiting fear and insecurity.
Okay, so we've got his twisted ideology, his mastery of propaganda, his plan for building a movement. But what was the end goal? Where did he want to take Germany? Mein Kampf outlines that too, his foreign policy dreams. And they are terrifying.
To say the least, we're talking apocalyptic ambitions here. Hitler straight up argues for expanding German territory, specifically targeting Eastern Europe as their, and I'm using his words here, living space. Lebensraum.
So not just land or power, but like racial domination.
Right, enacting this horrific racial hierarchy with the Aryan race at the top. Slavs, other groups he considered inferior, they were marked for extermination or enslavement. And he spells it out, the horrors he envisioned in Mein Kampf years before the Holocaust.
It's one thing to know about the Holocaust after the fact, but to read his intentions written down beforehand, that's bone-chilling.
It's a harsh lesson in how powerful words can be, how they can incite unthinkable evil, and a stark warning about the danger of ideology taken to extremes. Mein Kampf is like a scream from the past, telling us to be vigilant, to fight against dangerous ideas and the conditions that let them take hold.
And then there's this weird contradiction in his foreign policy, right?
Yeah.
He praises Mussolini for crushing the Italian Marxists. But at the same time, he's working with German Marxists during the Ruhr occupation. It's like ideology was just a tool to him, bendable to fit his goals.
Exactly. Hitler was a master manipulator, playing everyone off each other if it meant he got what he wanted. That lack of morals, that ruthlessness, that's what made him so dangerous.
It's overwhelming, really, to grasp how much destruction came from these ideas he lays bare in Mein Kampf. I'll be honest, it's a lot to unpack, even just dipping our toes into Mein Kampf like this. The specifics of his arguments are disturbing enough, but it's the bigger picture that really gets me.
You've hit on something crucial. As awful as the ideas in Mein Kampf are, the book didn't just appear out of thin air. It's a product of its time, a reflection of the chaos gripping Germany after World War I. Humiliation from the defeat, the economy in shambles, political instability, deep-seated anti-Semitism. It all created this perfect storm for Hitler's hate to take root.
And that's what's so scary. It wasn't just Germany. That mix of despair, resentment, scapegoating, it was everywhere, across Europe and beyond.
Absolutely. And that leads to a question we all need to ask ourselves. What are the conditions that make people vulnerable to this kind of extremism? How do we spot those warning signs and fight back against them today? Because the seeds of hatred, intolerance, violence, they're always there, just waiting for the right conditions to grow.
It's a heavy question, but so important. We have to learn from history, got to be on guard against the things that can lead us back to such darkness.
And remember, the fight against extremism, against hate, it never really ends. It takes constant vigilance, education, and being actively engaged. The cost of apathy, of looking away, is just too high.
This deep dive into Mein Kampf, it's been a stark reminder of that truth. Confronting these ideas, it's disturbing, yeah, but we have to if we want to make sure history doesn't repeat itself. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. Make sure to check back for our next episode where we'll be, well, let's just say, exploring a slightly less heavy topic. Until then, keep asking those tough questions.